I've given this talk a lot, but you know what? The last time I did it live was in February 2019. No, February 22, 2020, here. That was the last time I was in front of a live audience.
We're excited we're gonna have a live speaker today.
Yes.
And I was a formerly dead person, so there's that. Yes. So
I like that humor.
I may be alive now, but that's not always been the case. Oh, man. All right, where do I begin? Well, you know, when I first started giving this talk, I was like, my husband killed himself. It was a mess. It was horrible. And I went, about my husband killed himself, and on and on. And then I wrote a book. And as I worked on the book, I realized the story was not about, the only element that he really contributed to the story was he killed himself and sent me on a path of, frankly, losing my mind. As you and I were discussing, I was always a very sensitive soul. When he did this with a gun, left a mess, and I lost my mind. He and I lived in a beautiful place in Norfolk, and it was a downward spiral, went on and on. And in fact, the woman took me into her home because I started spending a lot of time in my car. People tried to take me in, but nobody could manage me. Nobody knew what to do. I had terrible nightmares. And a very kind soul named Tracy actually took me into her home. And I lived there for 4 months. And then another kind soul stepped in, and I shared a home with him, and he was pretty much my caregiver for another 2 years. And then at the end of 2 years, I was still pretty wobbly. I was not doing well mentally or emotionally. I actually had come up with a plan how to end my life, and I thought about it a lot. And I had a plan in place, the means, etc. And then somewhere in this time, I was diagnosed with stage 2 cancer. I could hardly believe it. I felt like enough, you know. And I had been a person of great faith before this, and after this, what do you do when you relied on God your whole life and you lose God? It's pretty awful. So then to be diagnosed with stage 2 cancer was unbelievable. I was like, what are we doing? What's the plan? You know, is it to see how much torture one woman can endure? And then I went to the hospital for a surgical biopsy. I actually had been seen by 2 doctors at this point, and a biopsy was done to determine how far the disease had spread. And it was determined to be, well, I didn't even get the report on that. It had been determined to be stage 2 upon physical examination. And then during biopsy, somebody made boo-boo. And when I woke up in the hospital, I told the nurse, it was an RN, I said, something's gone very wrong, I'm bleeding too much. Because the first thing you do when you wake up in recovery is they say, off you go, off to the bathroom, get ready to go home, you need this bed, off you go. And it was when I was walking off to the bathroom, I said, something's gone very wrong, I'm bleeding out. And I told her that 2 more times, 3 times in total, and her response was, once you get home, lie down and feel better. Not a good choice. And you know what's really interesting? I learned this years and years ago. I don't know if it's still true, but it's my 15-year-old stat, but women die more from cardiac events at a proportion than men. And the reason is when we present to the hospital with chest pain, arm pain, back pain, whatever, we're told it's an anxiety attack. Just go home, here's some Valium, you'll feel better. And they go home and die. So we need to find a way to fix that. When people present to the hospital with symptoms, like if they say I'm bleeding out, that somebody says, oh, let me go get the doctor. That doesn't sound good. I mean, I was 59 years old at this point. I kind of knew what's too much blood. Anyway, they sent me home, and at home, I had this lovely home. It was a modest home. It was a nice little brick ranch. I had wall-to-wall white carpet. And when you're bleeding to death, your number one concern is housekeeping. You know, you don't think of this. So I was so worried about that carpet. And then I actually went and stood in the shower because I didn't want to mess up the carpet. Something about well-behaved women, huh? And in that shower, prior to this, I had people read me the Bible. It was a source of immense comfort throughout the whole thing, from as soon as his life ended to this 29 months in his diagnosis. I had people read me the Bible, and that was a source of tremendous comfort and solace. And something someone read me, really, what talking about resonated, was like alarm bells went off, was 1 Corinthians 10:13, which said God will show you the way out. So when I was standing in that shower, And I'm thinking about 1 Corinthians 10:13. God will show me the way out. And I thought, I've been praying to die. I had had 3 prayers I prayed every night. God, heal me or let me die. I knew I couldn't stay in this hellish limbo. 2, when I do die, spare me the life of you. I didn't want to see this again. After his death, I had a complete breakdown. I didn't want to see that. And number 3 was, I'm tired of hard decisions. After his death, there were a lot of very difficult decisions to be made. And I was tired. So tired of hard decisions to the point that I bought myself 12 white polo shirts and 4 pairs of jeans. So every morning I didn't have to pick a color. Just open the closet, polo shirt, pair of jeans, I'm done. So standing in that shower and seeing all this blood, oh man, it's amazing how much blood the human body can lose and still be upright. And I was like, okay, you're dying. You're bleeding to death. And I thought, maybe this is God's mercy. You know, God will show me the way out. Maybe this is mercy. I've been thinking about ending my own life, and now everyone will say, well, you know what? She didn't do it to herself. She went in for medical care. She tried to stay alive, and now this thing happened. So I thought, no, this might be God's grace, God's mercy. So standing in that shower, I thought about there, and there were 2 very dear people in my life who had taken me to the hospital, waited for me, driven me home, and in fact, one of them was the man who had taken care of me for 2 years. So I'm standing in the shower and thinking about all this, and I thought, you know, is it fair to them for them to walk in this bathroom in 5 minutes to check on me and find me splayed out on the floor, having bled to death? So I really did think about it quite a bit. I realized I was starting a little wobbly in the head, and I realized I could just sit down in that shower, it'd be over. You know, sitting down and speed things right up. So I really thought about it, and I actually thought about the story of Jesus and the 3 temptations before he began his ministry. And one was where the devil says, well, you know, throw yourself off a cliff, it'll be fine. And Jesus says no, and then the devil quotes scripture, quotes the 91st Psalm to Jesus. And I thought, is that what's happening with 1 Corinthians 10:13? Is this a devilish temptation? Anyway, I decided to step out of the shower, and I walked into the living room all wrapped up in towels and told my friends to call 911. I was taken to a small ER, and it was an ER that was not connected to a hospital. And in that ER, they made no mistakes. And they didn't seem to believe that this was serious. And at this point, I decided, you know, let's get this show on the road. There was an RN to my left, and I grabbed her hand, and I said, promise me you're not gonna let me die. And she said, I promise you I'm not gonna let you die. We have many solutions. Actually, what she said is, honey, I promise you you're not gonna die. We have many solutions for this. And I was like, okay. And she was very motherly. You know, I was crying on my back on a gurney in an ER, and she wiped the tears away, and it was very sweet. So they did make some more boo-boos. And they walked out of the room after they had done a couple things, and which was not a good idea. And then I bled to death in that ER. And they had given me a shot of Dilaudid, which is a powerful derivative of morphine. And boy, between the blood loss and that morphine hitting my heart, that's what happened. It didn't take long. I was gone, Chief. And in fact, my friend who was with me said, was, you know, keeping an eye on me. At one point, my blood pressure, you know, they had that little blue machine on a stick. My blood pressure hit 32/25. Yeah, which is basically you're gone. And what's interesting is that's when my eyes popped open. And he said, I tried to sit up on the gurney, and I reached up to heaven with both arms. And he said, you talked to somebody that only you could see. And then after I did that, I flopped back down on the gurney, and then there was error blood pressure, which meant it was lower than 32/25, but that's when the fun began. I told this so many times, but the fact is, dying was a blast. And one thing this experience did was take away all fear of death. You know, the Bible says that death is the last enemy that shall be overcome. And I think it's the fear of death that we have to overcome. Like the speaker before, I mean, fear is a very present thing in the Bible. I need to look how many times is fear mentioned in the Bible, but it's over 100. I know the kingdom of heaven is mentioned like 109 times in the Bible. But it took away my fear, because at the moment of my death, I was unconscious, and I woke up when I died. And I woke up being catapulted out of my body. And that was just so cool. It was so amazing. And instantly, I mean, I was like, whoa, that's dramatic. And you know, I've often read, because I had read so many accounts of near-death experiences, and I've often read that sometimes when people die unexpectedly, they're confused as to what's happening. And what was happening. And there were so many facets of this. I felt like, you know, as soon as I passed on, it really seemed like I had awakened, and that the whole 59 years had been like a dream. It seemed all kind of fuzzy and unimportant and fast, and it just all seemed so unimportant. And shortly into this experience, my first thought was, my heart has stopped. And I thought, how do I know that? I thought, I don't know how I know that, but I know that's right. And then the other thing that happened very early on is I felt the presence of somebody join me while I'm still floating away from my body. I very distinctively felt a divine presence. And I turned my head to my left and looked up because this figure was to my left and far, far taller than me. And I thought it was pretty cool that even in this experience, I'm looking over my left shoulder. So there was something there to me. And as I did that, I was very happy to have this being with me. And I said, and who are you? And the answer was, you, Rosemary. You are the image and likeness. I'm the original. And I thought, whoa, that's First Genesis 27. How fascinating is that? And it was a Bible verse that I had spent many years of my life studying and trying to understand. But this came with an infusion of knowledge. It's just so amazing. And the experience went on and on and on. If you told me when I came back that I had been dead for a day, I would have believed it. Time had no relevance. And I know that's difficult to imagine, but that was the fact. Time had no meaning. You know, Einstein said, to those of us who are committed physicists, the past, present, and future are only illusion, however persistent. And I thought, wow, I understand that a little better now too. And then, as I said, the experience went on for some great time, and many, many things happened. And then at some point, I was no longer floating, but I was in a white room. And, oh, I remember, I want to share about the giggle. Very early on in this experience, I thought to myself, I'm dying. And then I thought, actually, no, that's not right. You're not dying, you're dead. So when you're going to your reward, correcting your tense is the most important thing. So I thought that's pretty funny that not only yet was I still editing after 35 years as a professional writer, but I was also still had my pretty unique sense of humor. So I thought, that's funny. And I laughed out loud and I heard myself laugh. And I thought, you know, I don't think I have lungs. I know I don't have breath sounds, but I'm producing sound just as I had on Earth. My voice sounds just like it sounded on Earth. My giggle sounds just like it sounded on Earth. And that thought that every single thing I am went with me, even down to my funny little giggle, was immensely reassuring that everything we are goes with us. And there really is. I know that the people left behind, it looks like you've lost someone and they're gone and there's no more communication. But to the person having the experience, nothing about their essence has changed. And one of the thoughts I had early on was, what did I leave behind on that gurney in that little ER? And I thought, worry and anxiety and woe and upset and guilt and so many negative things. And I thought, I've always wondered what me, the over-anxious, ruminate over every single thing writer would look like with none of those negative characteristics. Oh, this is great. So that's what I left behind. Everything else I am went with me. And so further along in this experience, I don't remember the transition from floating in this velvety blackness, which was actively comforting me, but being on my feet now in a white room. I don't remember how I transitioned from one to the other, but now I'm on my feet. And I remember thinking there, I thought, I don't know if I have feet or legs, but I see a door up ahead, maybe 20 feet ahead. And I thought, I can move with intention. I know I can form an intention to get to that door and I'll get there. And I'm so disappointed in myself. I didn't look at my feet. No do-overs on that one. But as I'm crossing to that door, because I had been fascinated by near-death experiences and read them for decades, ever since Raymond Moody's Life After Life, which I think was 76 or 78. I have read every book I could get my hands on. You know, Damien Brinkley, Betty Eady, George Ritchie, everything I could get my hands on, I read. So I knew what that door meant. That door meant we were to the point of no return. The door meant we're doing this, we're doing it. As I'm moving, perambulating, and that word came to mind in the midst of this, as I'm perambulating toward the door, I thought, I remember looking at this in this white room, and there was a mist falling. And it was a very light mist, but it was almost like a London fog. And I thought, this mist is not cool or damp as one might expect it to be. And I am again accompanied by a spiritual being, I guess we call it an angel. And I tried to focus on an individual droplet in this room. And I felt like I ought to be able to, and that sounds pretty much out there because these are itty bitty droplets that you would see in a fog. And when I tried to do so, I asked the angel, why can't I see? Why can't I see this individual droplet? The angel said, your eyes have not acclimated to this new spiritual environment yet. And in time you will be able to see, but not right now. But the angel explained to me that these droplets were particles of light, and it was for my healing, and that nobody can go into heaven in a compromised state. That some people have suffered all manner of difficulties on earth, from amputations to a long-term disease process, to loss of sight, loss of vision, and they are restored to their innate wholeness. And like Tom was saying earlier, he said that the word perfect actually, back to the original text, means whole. So when Jesus said, be ye perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect, he was saying, be ye whole, even as your Father in heaven is whole. And that was my sense of it, that before we can go into heaven, we have to be whole. You know, we can't be the messed up, compromised, physically challenged beings. And that was made very clear to me. And as I got near that white door, and unfortunately, I'm not sure the chronology of this, but it was made clear to me that if I agreed to go back to earth, I would be restored to wholeness. And what's so interesting, I wasn't told I'd be restored to perfection. I was told I'd be restored to wholeness. And I thought, that's pretty cool. And it wasn't even explained that you'll be healed of a disease, or you'll be healed of the PTSD or the guilt or the pain or whatever. It was just, you'll be restored to wholeness. So I got to that door, and the door was shut. I was a little bit miffed about that. And I paused at the door. I was preparing to put my right hand up to push through the door. And I remember thinking, right-handed on earth, right-handed in heaven, which also was pretty cool. So everything we are really does go with us. And as I put my right hand up, I did pause, and I asked, is this the divine will for my life? And I only got to, is this the divine? And before I could even finish the sentence, the answer was immediate. The answer was no, it's not. It's not the divine will that a medical mistake ends your life when you're 59. But I was told, whatever you decide, if you go forward into heaven, or if you return to earth, you go involve God's mercy and blessings and care and love and grace. And that's a pretty sweet deal. I'll take that deal. So that's when I guess I put my right hand up to push through the door. And at that moment, I had a vision of that nurse who'd shown me such kindness in the ER. And suddenly I was observing a scene, and she was in the hospital, the little supply room at that ER. And she was surrounded by linens and all the stuff that you'd find in a hospital, all stacked up neatly. And she was sitting on a little metal stool, leaning forward with her head in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. And she said through tears, I promised that woman I wasn't going to let her die, and I lost her. And I thought, oh man, don't do that to me. But then I thought, you know what, she's an RN, she signed up for this. She agreed to, be here when people pass. I think she looks about my age. Surely she's seen many people pass on. And then it was a different scene. I didn't just see her, but I felt her pain. I felt it right here in my heart, I guess, in that part of one's body. And I recognized that agonal grief is what I had experienced after my husband's suicide. And her grief was so deep and profound. And that's when I realized I can't do this. If I can spare one human being that much pain and agony, I have to go back. And that was very difficult. And I put my right hand, I remember I had my right hand up, and I put my right hand down at my side. And in the nanosecond, I was back on that gurney in that little ER. And this time, lots of people in the room. My buddy's out in the hall, I guess, somewhere. He's not there. Lots and lots of people in the room, lots of stuff happening around me. And I was transported by ambulance very quickly to a nearby hospital. And then I got some attention. Once I came back from this thing, I had some attention. But I knew, even during that ambulance ride from the little ER to it was a trauma center, I knew everything had changed. Every single thing. It was like that grief had just been this heavy, dark blanket, and it was gone. It was absolutely gone. It wasn't better, it was gone. And the guilt, so much guilt over what he had done. And that's something only suicide survivors can understand, I think, but the guilt was unbelievable. And I realized that guilt was gone, and something I was told, because I've heard a lot of people say when they die, they're 50%, you know, when they come back, they feel like they're 50% in this world and 50% in that world. That was not the case. I felt like I was 95% still in heaven and 5% here. So talking with the angels was really very easy. And I asked a lot of questions, you know, even in the ambulance. Well, in the ambulance ride, actually, when I got into that ambulance, I felt this very large angel get in the ambulance with me. I mean, I'm on a gurney being loaded up, and they have an oxygen mask on my face now. And I'm sure, well, actually, my buddy, they let me see my buddy briefly before the ambulance ride, and he said, "You looked awful." He said, "You've heard the expression white as a sheet, but you don't really understand it till you see it." He said, "You were white as a sheet," and he said, "You were dark blue lips and blue under your eyes." And he said he had been a medic in Vietnam, and he said, "I've seen people that way, but nobody alive." But in the ambulance, I had an oxygen mask on me. And this great big angel sat beside me, and I'm on a gurney, and kept telling me funny stories. And I kept laughing out loud. And I remember I would take the oxygen mask off so I could laugh better. And the attendant would come over and snap that mask back on my face. And finally he said, "Keep it on." But the angels were just, I mean, and I thought, how lovely that God knows I have a sense of humor and sends me an angel with an even better sense of humor to crack me up for the ride to the hospital, so I'm not distracted by what was that. But when I was put in the hospital, I was there for several days. There were times I again had my two friends and more friends that would come to the hospital and make sure I was not alone in there. But every now and then somebody would have to go out to lunch, and I was left alone in the hospital bed. But when those people walked out, when my earth people, my earth friends walked out, angels appeared beside the bed, and they sang the songs. And it was some of the most beautiful, beautiful music anyone could ever imagine. And I would tell the angels, I would say, "This is too much. It's so beautiful." And I said, "Look, I'm really good with houses because I'm an architectural historian." I said, "The music, melody, and lyrics, not so much. I don't know if I'm going to be able to remember this." And the angels said, "This isn't for you to remember. This is for your peace and your joy and your healing." And I said, "This is a thank you for agreeing to return, because we know how hard it is to have seen heaven and come back to earth." And that was quite a memory. That was very intense. But yes, every time the people left, the angels appeared at my bedside. And you know, there was a time, a day or two in, I guess it was less than a day in, I'm on total bed rest in this hospital. And I realized in my torso area, in the abdominal area, I guess, I felt weird. I knew something wasn't right. And I asked the angels, I said, "What's going on? Something doesn't feel right here." And the angels told me, they said, there are adjustments being made, but you're going to be okay. Oh, that's pretty cool. I never thought of angels doing adjustments. And then the grief and the shame and the guilt, because when somebody has trauma like that, it's not just that you find out who your real friends are. So many of the people who thought were your real friends scatter. They just disappear. Nobody knew what to do with me. I'd had some success as an author, minimal success, but people expected me to be strong, capable, and move on, and all the other foolish cliches people say. But these angels helped me remember who I really was. The whole experience helped me remember who I really was. And one of the profound things that happened, my husband had been an agnostic, and I felt like it was my personal duty to bring him to Christ, to show him that there is a God, to show him to have faith in God. And I had failed. And I took that burden very heavily on myself, that I had failed God. You know, you're given a task by God and you fail. I felt awful, beyond awful. Something awful about putting it in your own head, which is not true. God doesn't look at us and say, F, nice try, but F, out of here. So one of the things I was told by these angels was, you assigned yourself as his spiritual guardian. That was nothing God asked of you. Your job was to be a blessing of light and love in the world, and to show him what it looks like to have the love of God in your heart. That was your job. Your job was not to fix him. And the Bible verse was spoken to me, which is work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. And they said, there's nothing in that about working out his salvation. You're to work out yours. And one of the questions I asked is, where is he? You know, I had wondered this had been 29 months between his death and my own, and I wondered, where is he? And the answer was, he's with us. And that was immensely comforting. And I said, well, what's going on with him? What's happening? You know, where's he hanging out? What's going on? And how's his days? And, you know, and the answer was very brusque. It was none of your business. And I thought, for angels to keep company with the Most High God, that seems rather curt. But it was explained to me that it wasn't my business now, that I had married him for better and for worse, in sickness and health, till death do us part, and now we were parted. I mean, he died and then I died. How much more parted can you get? And that was also immensely comforting. And bit by bit, the angels told me many things, but the substance of it was, this was over. And that all the pain and misery occasioned by his suicide, because right before he did this horrible thing, he had called me and there had been a terrible, terrible argument. And things were said that should not have been said. And I've learned that that's not uncommon. Somebody kills themselves. It's not uncommon. It's almost like they have to ratchet up the anger. They have to get to a mental place where they can separate and be very angry before they can do this horrible thing. So that was, the angels told me that whole argument, the thing that followed, the abandonment by dear friends I thought were dear, that it had all been encapsulated and it couldn't hurt me anymore. And I thought encapsulated was a great word because that's a term used in architecture. When you're trying to remediate a house for some contaminant, you often encapsulate rather than remove, because sometimes in the removal of those contaminants, you release more into the air. So it was told to me that all the darkness and the negative things about this experience surrounding his death had been encapsulated. That was so comforting because they were saying, yeah, it was a thing. It was a horrible thing and it happened, but it can't hurt you anymore. And there's a Amplified Bible has the, what is it? I think it's from John, but it says, I have overcome the world. And the Amplified Bible interpretation is, I have deprived it of the power to harm you. And that's what this felt like. You know, this was a very worldly thing he did, but it had now been deprived of power to harm me. So in the hospital bed, when, you know, my people that were with me either fell asleep or they stepped out, the angels would answer my questions, and I had a lot of questions. And it, you know, for 29 months, I had circled the mountain asking the same question. How could he do this to me? I thought he loved me. I thought we were friends. How could he do this to me? I thought he loved me. I thought we were friends. And this took me, somebody said, you'll never find healing on the merry-go-round. I absolutely love that. And this whole thing, I think it's Deuteronomy 2:3, you've circled the mountain long enough, time to stop and go north. I had just been circling the mountain. Why did he do this? I thought he loved me. I thought we were friends. Why did he do this? I thought he loved me. I thought we were friends. And this took me out of that. And in time, by time, I mean days, I came to see that this wasn't my story. And then as the healing continued, and I'm talking about emotional healing, I came to see this wasn't even his story. You know, this was a darkness that had taken over him. But this wasn't even true about him as a child of God. And that was very liberating too, because how can you be angry at someone when you realize not only is that not my story, but that's not even his story. And that enabled me to forgive him. And that was huge. Oh my gosh, that was huge. And then it took some time. I was out of the hospital a few days later, and I went back to my oncologist and I said, hey, you know what? We're not going to be starting that chemo and radiation, because it turns out I was healed in heaven. Everything's great. Because I also knew in my heart, just as the emotional healing had been so profound, I knew that I'd been healed of the disease process as well. The oncologist did not take that well. He gave me a rather stern lecture on what happens when people rely on faith to heal. And I said, this isn't faith. This is a spiritual healing. This was me going to heaven, talking to what I believe to be the Holy Ghost, being with angels, being told if I agreed to come back, I'd be healed. I said, this isn't just me fasting on carrot juice and, you know, trusting positive affirmations. And he then told me how I would die. And he said, I've been with people like this, and the disease process is so ugly and so horrific. And he described a litany of horrible things that would happen to me as I, you know, got sicker and sicker and sicker. There's a book by Larry Dawsey, who's one of my heroes. It's called Be Careful What You Pray For. And he has a term in that book called medical hexing. And it's when the doctors will say, your next heartbeat might be your last, or you'll be dead in 3 months, or, you know, it'll take a year, but you're going to be dead. And people die on schedule. People die on schedule. It's amazing. And, you know, this is a funny little aside, but I had a root canal done in 2002. And I was told by the dentist, I remember this, he said, now that's probably going to last you about 20 years. And in 2021, it went bad. And I thought, why did I let that in? Why did I accept this kind of a hex, I guess? And I mean, that's a little bit different, but there are people who have root canals that last for decades. So I thought about that. But yes, medical hexing is a thing where people go do what they're told to do. I had a beloved family member that was diagnosed with an ugly disease process, and he said, the doctor said, you'll be dead before Thanksgiving. And he died 2 days before Thanksgiving. And Larry Dossey's point is we have to be careful what we say and what we let in. And Larry Dossey's point is, yeah, you may need to say, here's the realistic expectation, but you also need to say something positive. You need to say something loving, like, you know, this typically with many people, you have maybe 6 months, but I'm going to be praying for you. Or typically, you know, and generally speaking, this is how it unfolds, but generalizations aren't always true. But this thing of you'll be dead before Christmas, you know, we need to be careful with that. But this oncologist was very, what's the word? Very scientific, I guess we could say. And he delineated in great detail how I would die. And it ended with something graphic and horrible. And he said, is that what you want? You know, I'll be called in at the last minute to give you morphine. Is that really what you want? And I was like, oh. And suddenly I kind of saw it from his perspective that I looked like a Fruit Loop. I looked just nut, absolutely like a nut. But I left his office and boy, I just went right back into the valley. And I thought, how can I do this? I hear God speak to me. I am in company with the angels of heaven. And this oncologist sends me right back into the valley of despair and doubt and darkness. So I ended up finding another oncologist an hour away in another direction. And she was very hesitant to take the case. It was very hard to find somebody else to go up against this guy. And the reason I wanted an affirmation. I wanted to know that what I had heard in heaven was true. So the second oncologist, it took some time for me to heal. It took about 7 weeks. She did a second surgical biopsy. And she was pretty nervous about the whole thing. She had an expectation that I was wrong. And yet she was also very sweet. She also said, I'm praying for you every day. She said, I don't know that I've ever had a case quite like this. So my friend was there waiting in the waiting room while they did a 3-hour biopsy on me. And they took flesh from all kinds of places. And my friend said that when this doctor emerged into the waiting room, she threw her arms around his neck and said, she's right. There's not one cell of cancer in her body. And she said, not only is there no cancer, but her flesh is so pink and pretty and perfect that were it not for the medical test, I would believe she ever had cancer. So there wasn't even a scar, there wasn't even a wound, there wasn't even damage. Everything was perfect. And there's so many PSs to this story. After this, I started selling all my personal possessions, everything. So I kept my clothes, I kept my children's cute things that they had made me through the years. I kept a few other things. And I donated my research materials. I've written 9 books. I donated my research materials to a college library and sold my car. I had a car I'd had for 4 months. Beautiful car. Oh, red car, white leather interior. It was Cameron. But anyway, I thought, I don't think I need that car anymore. So I sold the car. I bought a slightly used Prius. I sold my house. It's on the market for 2 hours and sold. And this was 3 years ago, 3.5 years ago. And then I moved 1,000 miles to the Midwest to start a new life. And I've never missed any of that stuff. And it's been a radically different life. It's been a dramatically different life. But when Dick invited me to be here, he said, talk about the healing. Shortly after I came out of that hospital, and for 2 weeks I had to have somebody living in the house and taking care of me. But once I was alone in that house again, I pulled out my Bible and it flopped open to the 23rd Psalm, and one of the lines was highlighted. And the line was, he restoreth my soul. And I cried. I thought, that's the healing. That's the real healing. As my soul was restored. And the PS to this is so remarkable. When I was even in that hospital bed, maybe this was just God saying, hello, we really healed you. I had arthritis in my wrist, perhaps from 35 years as a writer. But I had some arthritis in my wrist. It was making movement a little more difficult. It was gone. And I had some high frequency hearing loss. And that disappeared. I noticed I could hear people all the way down the hospital corridor, like just crystal clear. That was gone. I had a busted right knee from an accident. That was healed. My left shoulder had been so busted up in an accident, I mean, a gardening accident. But my left shoulder was so busted up and it actually gotten a little deformed. That was healed. So as a friend in IT says, he says, you got rebooted by the creator. And you know, the PS, Dick and I were talking about this at dinner the other day, but I had, prior to this, I'd been diagnosed with glaucoma. And I had harbored this terrible fear of going blind. I mean, who doesn't, you know? I'd been so frightened. And after this, I just didn't want to go back to an eye doctor because I've been seeing an eye doctor every 3 months. And he said, you've already lost about 15% of your optic nerve. And the belief is once you work, the belief is the optic nerve cannot regenerate. So and then I had a problem with my right eye where I was having some trouble seeing. So I did make an emergency appointment with an eye doctor in the Midwest where I'm living now. And this just happened probably 4 months ago. And I was so scared I started to cry during the exam because I thought they're going to know. You know, I should not have ignored the glaucoma. I stopped taking the drops, all of it. But I prayed every morning. This is something I haven't shared publicly, but every morning I would, before my day started, I would stand beside my bed and I would pray. I'd make the sign of the cross on each eye and I would say, in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost, please bless my vision. When I look at the children of God, may I see them as they are, holy and pure and full of light. The Bible verse, man looketh on the outward appearance, but the Lord looketh on the heart. I would ask God, give me the eyes to see the heart. Take away any judgment of seeing somebody as thin or fat or attractive or ugly or whatever, but help me, give me real vision, true vision that is of God, holy vision. So I prayed that way every morning for years, I guess 3 years. So this doctor was so kind to me. He was just so kind and good. But he said, your optic nerve has no damage. Is it 100%? And he also said, your eyes are really healthy. And he said, you have the eyes of a 30-year-old. He said, there's no problem here. And he said, you don't have glaucoma. And I was like, wow. And how could I doubt, you know, after this remarkable healing? Because as it turns out, I had no heartbeat and no blood pressure for more than 10 minutes. And because of the nature of my death, which was bleeding to death, they can't do CPR because you just push out more blood. So there's an expectation after 5 to 6 minutes without oxygen, the brain's irrevocably damaged. And not only was my brain not irrevocably damaged, but I feel like I got an upgrade, you know? I feel like I got a little upgrade in IQ here, but it has been a very dramatic event, to say the least. And if there's any questions, I will entertain questions.
That was really comprehensive. Detailed and really good explanation of everything and description of everything.
Thank you.
All my questions are medical, so that could be an aside. So
Oh, yeah. Well,
I used to be cancer screening.
oh, really?
Yeah. But you know, talk about that so much.
Well, you know, one of the things I did, I wrote a book on my website, temporarydeath.com, because, you know, words matter. I did not have a near-death experience. Near-death is when you're on an airplane and you're landing and everything goes sideways and you're like, oh no, we're gonna die. And then he pulls it up and you're fine. That's near-death. Having no heartbeat for 10 minutes, that's temporarily dead. So anyway, my website's temporarydeath.com, and then my book is Remembering the Light, How Dying Saved My Life. But in preparation of writing that book, I actually interviewed and a couple ER nurses, and it was fascinating. And they said, just because you resuscitate somebody from having blood out, because one of the questions for the doctor, that next morning at the hospital, the doctor comes in, and I was kind of gratified to see he was my age. You know, we've put the kids back away, and now I got the older doctor, and he says, you had a heart attack. And I said, oh, not me. You know, Rosemary, name on the file, check that. Not me, not me, not me. Because I was a bike, I rode my bike and I walked a lot. He said, no, it's you. And I said, I don't understand. And he said, well, you lost so much blood, your heart stopped. And I said, well, how much blood did I lose? Because, you know, it's pretty interesting. And he said, more than 40%. I said, come on, how much? He said, well, after 40%, it doesn't matter because your heart's like, ah! Yeah. And then they give me, you know, apparently I was near the end anyway when they gave me that allotted. It was just enough to go to my heart. My heart's, what are you doing?
Wait, did you say they gave you chronic?
Dilaudid, which is morphine.
Okay, I'm interested, okay.
Yes, they gave me Dilaudid. But I asked this ER nurse, I said, so what's, when somebody bleeds out like that, what are the odds of getting them back? And she wouldn't give me odds, but what she said is they had just had 20 something, I guess he was a 25-year-old, 26-year-old who had bled to death from an internal hemorrhage. And they successfully resuscitated him, but I think she said 24 hours later, he died again because the damage to the internal organs was just too great. And apparently when you bleed to death and stay dead for 10 minutes, things are already going, ooh. So it was pretty dramatic just from that angle. And, the doctor, so I did have a medical affirmation that my heart had stopped, which was cool. And they did believe that I had sustained damage to the heart muscle, because he said when we brought you in and did blood work, your enzymes were way elevated. But he said they've already started to come back down, so we know it's not underlying heart disease. But they took me off for an echocardiogram to see how much damage there was to the heart muscle. And it was really pretty funny because, they're rolling me down the hallway in the gurney. And I say, y'all don't need to do this. I was healed in heaven. Everything's just fine. And I was just shouting at the nurses station and everyone I passed, we don't need to do this. Everything's just fine. And nobody paid any attention. But the doctor, the next morning, the doctor appears again at my bedside and he says, Rosemary, you're a very lucky woman. Your heart muscle is perfectly healthy. There's absolutely no damage. And consistently that happened because apparently it is pretty severe for a 59-year-old to bleed to death and be gone for 10 minutes. And then the other really fascinating piece from a medical standpoint is that, well, two things. One, at one point my buddy came to visit me and he said from like mid-calf down, and this was the next morning, he said from mid-calf down, your legs, that part of your legs and your feet, were so dark blue as to almost be black. And it stayed that way for 16 hours. And then they had put compression stockings on me and were pushing a lot. They brought in an air compressor. And I thought, why do we need an air compressor? But anyway, it was for the inflatable stockings that inflate and deflate and inflate. So I was pretty interested in 16 hours with black legs and there was no nerve damage or anything. And then the other thing was they told me when they discharged me, they sent me home after 4 days. And I was like, listen, I like this hospital thing. All I have to say is, I want some apple juice. I want some cranberry juice. Hey, can I have a second lunch? And they'd be like, okay. So they bring you food and the food is good. All these people complain about hospital food. Anytime you open your eyes and somebody's putting a plate in front of you, it is a win. I was a mother of 3 and married 24 years to husband 1, and I have cooked so many meals. I think I can't even face a skillet anymore. I mean, it's like a PTSD with a skillet. I'm like, I can't look at that again. No, we're not cooking anymore. So to have them bring me 3 meals a day and snacks, they bring you Jell-O. And I was actually on a liquid diet because they were concerned if the bleeding started again, I'd have to be rushed in for emergency surgery. And it's something that touched me deeply. I did not have much experience. I had relied on prayer my whole life for healing. And I hadn't had much experience with the medical world. But I guess 2 or 3 nights in, a surgeon came in the room and the little ER, they had packed me with gauze. And it turned out the gauze didn't stop the bleeding. It just kept them from seeing it. Oops, another oops. But there came the day of the great unveiling where they came in the room and pulled that gauze out. And this touched me deeply, but the surgeon explained before they did that, he said, you've been on a liquid diet because we don't know if we have to do an emergency surgery on you. But then when they came to pull out that gauze, he said, I'm on standby, I'm ready. We have an OR set aside for you on standby. We have surgical staff ready to go. If anything happens, you're going to be whisked away. And because I was like, does that gauze really need to come out? Let's just call this a day. Let's just forget all this happened. Let's not disturb things that aren't broken. And he said, no, it needs to come out. But I was so touched that his attitude very clearly was, you're not going to die on our watch. This is not going to happen again. I was so touched by that, you know, everyone had been dismissive before, like, just go home and lay down, you'll be fine. And at that little ER, I think they did their best, but they were over their heads. So to know that these people had thought about this and had a plan touched me really deeply. And as it turned out, there was no bleeding. And on day 4 or 5, it was day 4, the doctor came in again and sat down at my bedside. He said, it's time for you to go home. He said, I understand you don't want to go home. Because I had every meal that came, I was like, I want to go. This is great. I don't even have to get out of bed. You know, if you bring me food. But he said, you need to go home. And I said, I want to. And he said, your blood cell count is still so low. That he said, now you're at grave risk of opportunistic infections, nursing staff. And he said, you get one of those, we probably can't save you. I was like, oh. And he did tell me it would take 2 to 3 months for the bone marrow to regenerate the white and red blood cells. And so that I would expect it to have the breathlessness and the other problems for 2 to 3 months. And I called a friend who's a real prayer warrior, and I told him that, and he said, we'll just see about that. And then I had a follow-up. I had another doctor's appointment at 2 weeks out, and they did blood work, and the doctor looked at the blood work and said, I see there's a mistake here. And I said, what's the mistake? She said, your numbers are literally textbook perfect. You know, right down to the number after the decimal point. She said, they're absolutely perfect. I said, that's not a mistake. I'm back to walking and riding my bike. I'm fine. She said, you're riding the bike? And I said, I feel pretty good. But that was, I did tell I was riding it slowly, but so that was a big surprise. There's no medical explanation for, and I had had no transfusions. They said they made a decision to not give me transfusions because I had shown a hypersensitivity to drugs of every kind. And so they said, well, and they had said that I was recovering pretty well, even on that first night. So they made it, and I was very puzzled by that. But anyway, but they did have lots of stuff going in on big needles, you know.
That was my question, was about, you know, platelets, packed red cells, and what they might have given you just to elevate your blood pressure and to give you clotting factors, because if you're bleeding out, you're losing your ability to clot at the same time.
Well, there was some concern, if I remember this right, and I hope I do, because I was still coming back online for a couple of days, that there were some concerns after having bled to death to that point, that there might be blood clots in places.
Yeah.
So they were very, as I remember, they were concerned about that. But would platelets have been red or what?
Platelets are clear.
Okay, because I had all kinds of bags hanging.
Right.
And I don't know that I didn't have platelets. I don't know. I just know that there were always 2 or 3, maybe even more bags hanging on that.
What happens sometimes to people bleeding out is they go into this state where their body just starts forming clots everywhere in an effort to stop. The bleeding is called disseminated intravascular coagulation.
I have heard of that.
DIC. And it can go to your lungs. That happened to me one time. So that's how I'm a little familiar with that and working in a lab. And, yeah. So this is fascinating, everything you're talking
Oh, I'm so grateful to hear that.
Yeah.
You know, what you said earlier was true. It may not be a big audience, but it's the right audience.
Yeah.
So thank you. Because I have wondered about that. I know nothing. This lovely gent that may be there watching, but he was a retired nurse, is a retired nurse. And so he had a stethoscope and I said, hey, listen to my lungs, listen to my lungs. And he was feeling like back down on my back. And I said, what are you doing back there? He said, well, that's where your lungs are. I said, not on me. And he said, no, your lungs go on your back, down, one's bigger than the other. I said, are you sure? And he said, come sit on my lap and tell me everything you know about old houses. And I'll tell you everything I know about lungs, which absolutely cracked me up. So yes, I do remember some conversations about clots, but I didn't remember a lot. There seemed to be a lot of concerns. And one of them, I talked to a ER nurse, there were 2 of them I talked to, but one of them said, when a woman presents with hemorrhaging, like gynecological hemorrhaging, it's considered an emergent circumstance. And she said, for them to send you home is unbelievable. And she said, and then for the ER to just pack you with gauze was, yes.
If you needed to be packed, that's a sign that you shouldn't be going anywhere.
Yeah, it was real bad. I mean, I had been on that gurney in the ER, and I had to go potty, and I was wearing I was still wearing my shorts at that point, I was still wearing my street clothes. Because, you know, they bring you in and they, I guess, triage, assess, whatever. So I was on that gurney and I said, look, before we get started, I need to use the bathroom. And they said, well, do you want a bedpan? And of course, you know, me, the rugged individual, is like, oh, no, I'll just walk down the hall, I'll be fine. And so I did, I walked, it was pretty much across the hall, but as I walked across the hall, I left a path of blood that was this wide.
Well, your blood pressure was so low, you should have just passed out on the
Oh,
floor.
man.
Um,
But I did, I made it to the bathroom, but I ruined my favorite shoes, my favorite shorts. And my friend, my dear friend that had been my caregiver was there helping me. And you know, by that point, all modesty is gone, you know, I'm really a pretty modest person, but I said, can't we save the shoes? Because they were my favorite sandals, you know, they had little flowers in them, but everything was just drenched. And I remember then I walked back and, you know, my friend said he heard the janitor complaining that nobody could even walk across this blood path in the hallway. And I'm like, you know, shouldn't somebody said, is she still alive? You know, is she still with us? It was a very big mess.
And they sent you home after that?
No, so it was the trumpet, the hospital where I had a biopsy, that I went to the bathroom there and they said, once you get home, you'll feel better. And then I did go home. And even on the ride home, fortunately, the woman had leather seats, but I mean, I was on multiple layers of covering and everything soaked through. So yeah, I was home and then I was in that shower, realizing I was bleeding to death. And then that's when I was transported by ambulance back to yet another ER. And it was there that they packed me with gauze. And I mean, I was like, you know what? I know this isn't good. I know that blood makes a bigger mess than you think it will and all that, but the human body can only lose so much blood. And later my friend, I guess this is an important part of the story, my friend who had been in my living room, who'd driven me home from the hospital, she told me, she said, I knew you were bleeding to death. She said, I've taken care of a lot of people. And every time I would walk anywhere, she'd come behind me and start trying to clean up. And she cleaned up the bathroom multiple times, but she said, I didn't even know the human body had that much blood in it. And when I went to the hospital, I was taken by ambulance to an ER, she stayed behind in my house. And I didn't know this till later. But she spent that time on her knees in my living room, praying and saying, God, she's been through so much. I know this is just demonic, trying to take her out after all she survived. So she spent, I don't know how much time, I don't know, but on her knees saying, God, don't let this be how this ends. Because she said, I knew you were at the point of bleeding out. And I wasn't in that ER. I don't think I was in that ER, I don't know, 10 minutes that I went from, I'm not feeling so good, to passing out. So, well, if there are no more questions.
I have a question.
Okay, there's a question.
I'm wondering if the healing energy that you received can be passed on to other people by you.
Oh, can the healing energy I've received be passed on to other people? I don't think I'm a medium. One of the things I love about, what is it? The word immediate, which means without a medium. And I think that that's what God is. I think the energy, I don't believe it flows through people. I believe it flows through people just to be a shining light and to be love. But I think it has to come directly from God. And I think maybe just by, that's the reason I wrote a book. I did not want to write a book. I've written 9 books. I wrote a book, took 3 years. That was my goal, was to say, here's what happened. And is it reproducible? I have no doubt that it is. But I guess I don't want to think of myself as a healer, because I'm just the person that had this really wonderful thing happen. I think we're just all supposed to be shining lights. I was talking with my buddy Ellen yesterday, and she said, if we could take away all the self-recrimination and guilt in the world, there would just be peace on earth. You know, there's so much negative feeling about everything, from each other to countries, and now, you know, the Ukraine, and, you know, we hate this country, but this country is good. We're just supposed to do better. We're not supposed to send hate out from we're not supposed to even have it in our hearts. So, I mean, I'm still working all that out. But to answer your question, I think that this healing is reproducible. And that's why I shared this story. You know, that's why I wrote a book. Because, you know, bluntly, if it happened for me, it can happen for anybody.
Okay. Tell again the title of your book and where it's available.
Remembering the Light, How Dying Saved My Life. And it is available at the world's biggest bookstore. and it's now available in paperback, which is really cool. And I really struggled to write the book. Boy, did I struggle. Boy, oh boy, did I struggle with that book. Because my healing really started, this event happened September 5th, 2018, my own death. And that's really when the healing started. I mean, I came back changed, but boy, it took me some time to really 100% get over the anger, because I kind of fell back into the old habits of, why did he do this? And then I said, whoa, 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 we're not going down that path again. But it took some time for the full healing to unfold, and I'm not sure it's still fully unfolded. So I don't know, it took some effort. And number one reason I wrote the book, I gave this talk in person right before all the COVID stuff happened. And I gave it to a group in Newport News, actually. And I told the story there about right after my husband's suicide, I lost the ability, I mean, like the day after, I lost the ability to swallow any fluids, any food. I was in trauma and shock. And so she took me to one of these now care places or urgent care places. And the doctor comes in, and there's my daughter with me, and I'm sitting on the examining table, and the doctor comes in and says, so ladies, what's the problem? And my daughter says, well, she can't eat or drink anything, not even water. And she said her husband killed himself a day ago. She's got to start drinking water. And the doctor, he goes, oh my gosh. He said, the same thing happened with my Aunt Bertha's husband, and she was never right in the head again. And my daughter, very much to her credit, she said, doctor, that is not helpful. Are you going to help my mom or not? And so I shared that story at this lecture I gave in Newport News, or this talk, and a woman who was in the medical field said, you need to write a book. And I said, I don't want to write a book. And she said, you need to write a book. And she said, the reason is we don't know how to deal with trauma in the medical field. And she said, that's a classic example. He was genuinely shocked. And when my daughter made that comment, doctor, this is not helpful, are you going to help my mother or not? He quickly composed himself and said, okay, we'll give you some value, and did help. I went from being, I'm not going to eat or drink, I can't swallow, everything's wrong, to singing a song about chicken nuggets. I was pretty happy after I had a couple Valium. So, well, thank you very much. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much.
If there are no
Thank
more
you.
questions?
Thank you.
Questions.
Yes, go ahead, we're off now. I think, do I need to stand back here?
Yes, please.
I'm ready.
Okay. Now you have, some time in between your experience, and you've written the book, and you're expressing your experience one time. What are your feelings of the experience when you're going through so much trauma and really academic or this craziness for the medical field? Do you feel there was a message or a lesson for you in your spiritual growth at that when you look back? Do you see a lesson? Do you see a some type of beam of insight into that part? And certainly, once you have received the full blessing of all the healings that you have, how you like I should ask you next that question about that energy. Besides being filled with that gratitude, that spirit of love, what other feelings might you have that you haven't expressed yet? From the after and then before the healing, what lessons or insight do you see now that maybe you didn't see before?
What lessons or insights do I see now that I didn't see before? I was pretty spiritually minded before this. I mean, I spent easily an hour or two every day of my life praying, meditating, reading the Bible, reading Bible commentaries. I mean, I had notebooks of notes from reading. You ever seen the Interpreter's Bible? Are you familiar with the Interpreter's Bible? It's 12 volumes. I endeavored to read that cover to cover. What is that? 800 pages a volume? 12 volumes, a lot of pages. So I tried to read that. I read William Barclay's Bible interpretation cover to cover. I spent a lot of my life reading, wanting to know what the Bible meant. And that's why it was so cool when I heard that. So to answer your question about spiritual insights, when I heard that about you are the image and likeness, I'm the original, I was like, oh my gosh, I spent my life trying to understand Genesis 1:26, and I got it. I really got it. And I don't know, Somebody asked me the other day if I could go through this again, would I want to change anything? Yeah, I would. I would want to kill himself. No, people say, oh, we set ourselves up for these spiritual plans so we can really grow. I have to be a sadist to inflict that on myself. I had a good life with him, I thought. I was happy. I remember waking up happy every morning and thinking, I'm gonna go work in my garden, gonna tend to my flower beds, got those tomatoes. I was using all kinds of bizarre concoctions to make my tomatoes super tomatoes. And I kept a notebook of what worked and what didn't work, and on and on and on. I remember when I was married to him, waking up happy every morning and thanking God. I'd had a turbulent youth, a troubled time in my first marriage, and I never took it for granted that I had found this wonderful man. And I woke up just happy. So I didn't want that to go away. And now life is different. Something I read that helped me immensely. I mean, suicide really is a death like no other. My husband murdered himself with a gun to the head. Suicide is a death like no other. And I don't wake up happy. I wake up and I say prayers that God will continue to bless me and that I still pray for my eyes. I pray, because you're not really praying for your eyes, you're praying for vision. Like when you go out in traffic and somebody cuts you off and your first thought is, rah, rah, rah. I say, you know what? They may have been at the hospital all night. They may just have had their loved one in their life. And so I guess that's really the biggest shift is it took away a lot of the anger I had. I was angry even before he killed himself. I had a lot of issues with anger. And then it took really, I'm just now getting to a point where I don't get into these rages like I used to. So I don't know. Part of it's the human condition. We are flawed in the flesh. We are so flawed in so many ways. I certainly am. So it showed me, one, I don't mean to ramble, but my father was not a nice man. He abandoned us when I was 14, abandoned me and my mom. And even before that, I would go to his office, he was an executive, and I would go to his office and I'd see pictures of my 3 brothers on his desk at work. And I'd say, hey, Dad, I'm your youngest and your girl, where's my picture? And he'd say, when you do something worthy, you will earn a picture on my desk. And that was kind of how dads loved. You're bored and they go, it's a 7-pound lump. But then one day maybe you earn their love. And I never did earn his love. I never did. After he left us, he said, I never want to see you again. It was not a good scene. So with God, I could never think of God as father because I thought, I don't want any part of that. But I could think of God as mother. And after this, when I met God, or I don't mean to be flippant, but when that, you're the image and likeness, I'm the original, it just was so profound that God really, really likes us. We know God loves us, but God was like, I'm really proud of you. Yeah, you screwed up. Yeah, you made some mistakes, but I'm just so proud of you. And that was life changing. All my life, I thought God was like Dad. God is nothing like that. God is just crazy about us. So that was probably the biggest change, was realizing that God just enjoys us. And that, I put this in my book, but, if God had a desk, I'd have my picture on it. He wouldn't say, when you get that 12th book done, then I'll put your picture on my desk. And that has stuck with me. Well, thank you very much. I'll do the curtsy again.
Thank you.